If you take the cross-section of a leaf, this is how it is arranged in order to maximize photosynthesis. The epidermis is this layer here. That's that dermal layer that secretes the waxy cuticle. What you see immediately below that is what's called the palisade mesophyll. And these are long, thin cells that are all pressed closely to one another, and they're arranged so that their long axis is facing the light. What this does is it maximizes the amount of light that is being intercepted by each one of these cells. And of course, these cells are thick with chloroplasts, which do the actual work of capturing light energy and converting it into chemical energy. Below the palisade mesophyll is this area that's called the spongy mesophyll. And as you can see, this is all full of holes. The cells are much more loosely packed. There's a lot of air spaces in there. This is one of those structures that might make you think, we've got a space where there are lots and lots of holes in it. I bet that has something to do with the surface area to volume ratio. And you'd be correct, because the purpose or the function of the spongy mesophyll is gas exchange. The stomata are on the underside of the leaf in this plant. That makes sense because that minimizes evaporative water loss. But carbon dioxide comes in and sort of diffuses around it through all of these holes within the spongy mesophyll. The actual cells of the spongy mesophyll are exposing a lot of surface area to that gas in order to take up carbon dioxide. They also release waste oxygen into this spongy area, and it too diffuses out through the stomata. There are a lot of adaptations that look something like this, where you have, in terrestrial organisms anyway, where you'll have a very small opening to the outside air, and within it is a chamber that has huge surface area. Your lungs are one example. The spongy mesophyll of a plant is another example. The vascularized mantle cavity of the pulmonate mollusks like snails is a third example. Book lungs, so on and so on. We'll see a few more of these probably when we talk about the animals after the next exam. Plants grow in a different way than you do. There are two kinds of plant growth. One is what's called primary growth. Primary growth is when you have an apical meristem growing, and that causes a root or a shoot to get longer. Secondary growth is when a plant grows laterally. A lateral meristem is a structure called a cambium, and that causes a root or shoot to grow wider. Some plants do not have lateral meristems, and their stems never change in thickness. Wood, in particular, only forms in species that have lateral meristems. So primary growth is the shoot or root getting longer. Secondary growth is that root or shoot getting fatter. At the tip of any root, you'll see that there's this area in purple where cell division is actually taking place. Cells are dividing near the root tip, which is protected from the soil by what's called this root cap. These are all dead cells up here. Their only purpose is to protect the living, growing apical meristem behind them. Most of the growth of a plant root actually happens, interestingly, in this zone here. This is the zone of cellular elongation. And that causes the root to stretch outward as these cells become longer. After the cells go through elongation, they mature fully into different kinds of tissue, and they send out root hairs that increase the surface area of the root for greater absorption of water and nutrients from the soil. So cell division is occurring out here, but most of the root movement happens behind that zone. It happens back here in the root. Shoot growth is pretty similar. You have an apical meristem at the tip. Cell division happens near the apical meristem, and cell elongation happens behind it. Lateral meristems are found in these sort of like kind of armpit-like structures off to the side, and usually lateral meristems are inactive. There's sort of a backup mechanism. If this apical meristem gets destroyed or damaged and apical growth out of this axis can't continue, that will free up or unrepress the growth of an apical meristem. And one or both of these will grow out essentially to take the place of the original. In woody stems, there are two lateral meristems, or called the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. And these are a little odd. What you're looking at is a cross-section through a woody stem. And each one of these cambiums is a thin cylindrical layer of cells running the length of that stem. The vascular cambium is this layer that's more toward the inside of the plant. It adds new cells on the inside of itself, but also on the outside of itself. The cork cambium, which is farther out, only adds cells to the outside. Between these two, this is where the bark of a plant is found. The cork cambium is responsible for laying down cork cells and waterproofing the outside of the plant. It may also lay down lignin for structural support, but its main purpose is to make sure that this plant does not lose water through the outside of the shoot. As this vascular cambium as the cork cambium adds cells to the outside, they die either lignifying or becoming permeated with some sort of waterproof material and forming an outer layer on the plant that's in some ways a little bit like your skin, which also consists of dead, sloughed off cells. The vascular cambium occurs here. On the inner side of it is what's called secondary xylem. Remember, that's these are the vessels that transport water upward. This is also what's called sapwood. Sapwood is this lighter colored wood that you'll see if you were to cut through the trunk of a tree. And it consists of these living vessels that are moving water upward. On the outside of the vascular cambium is the bark. That is where the phloem is being formed. Again, the phloem are the vascular elements that pull carbohydrates down from the shoots toward the roots. Together with this phloem, the cork cambium and all the dead cells on the outside, those are all what we think of as bark, even though they consist of a number of different cell layers. The sapwood and the bark are the only, the sapwood still transports water. The living, growing part of the plant is here in the bark. If the cambiums are damaged too badly, a plant will actually stop growing and die. The same thing is true if you cut all the way through the bark all the way around, because you will have cut through the phloem, all of the phloem that the plant uses to transport nutrients and water down to the roots. This wood here in the middle is what's called heartwood. It does not actually transport water anymore. This used to be xylem tissue that brought water up from the roots, but now it only serves serves a structural function. And this is why occasionally you'll see trees that have rotted out from the inside. What that tree has lost is just the heartwood, and that's why it can keep on living, because all it's lost is some of its structural strength.